Hey all, I'm Kel Kidman. Welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we begin with Moderna submitting their COVID-19 vaccine for emergency approval. Now, these guys are just behind Pilzer. I still don't know how to pronounce that name. It's German, I don't know. I have been told how to pronounce it, didn't remember. But it's not relevant. Essentially, we have two COVID-19 vaccines coming right down the pike, and we're being told that they'll be ready pretty much before Christmas. We're going to have a vaccine ready. But this isn't really what I want to talk about, because though this is a happy story, and it's something to be celebrated because, well, it seems as though the pandemic is close to closing, or at least it should be. There is still more to go on for, because this is not the only sorts of stories that we're getting. We're also getting stories like this one. LA health official. Not wearing a mask is an act of domestic terrorism. Should be treated like one. Now, this is a ridiculous statement on its face, but what worries me more than the statement itself, which is already a problem because it's just an offense of authoritarian mask policy, which has been going on for, well, the past few months. It's not anything new and should be frankly expected at this point, particularly for such health officials coming out of places like California. What worries me more is that this doesn't see, I don't see any sign of the mask rhetoric stopping. Because even after the prime example, the prime argument for masks, which is, oh, they help other people, so you should wear them because otherwise you're killing grandma or something like that. That argument is dying because vaccines are going to be here within just a few weeks. And when those vaccines are there, there will be no excuse for anyone to say, well, you're hurting me by not wearing a mask. All I would be hurting is potentially myself, by allowing myself to get the disease or whatnot. Same goes with vaccines and whatnot. All these sorts of authoritarian policies that we're seeing would completely lose their water, or at least they should. Because I don't think they will. I mean, we've already seen in the past just a few months, and just a month ago, I think it was, actually, Fauci saying that even after a vaccine has been in the public and is available, you'll still need to wear masks. All of these health officials, all of these people who are pro-mask and are promoting these authoritarian policies are not going to stop promoting them just because a vaccine is out. It's not going to stop. I fail to see the evidence right now that anyone who is promoting authoritarian policies with regard to masks or with regard to business shutdowns or lockdowns or anything like that are going to stop promoting these policies just because a vaccine exists. I mean, we've already seen evidence of them shifting the goalposts before. Remember 2 weeks to slow the spread? Remember the original explanation for the lockdown? It hardly matters now. We're multiple months out. We're far, far away from where that was. But it doesn't matter. These people realize these people are not here just for public health. They're authoritarians, all right? They're authoritarians who are just trying to gain power and just trying to gain power over your life. And the way they've done it is convincing you that they should be able to control the minutia of your life, the small bits of your life, the things like putting on a mask. Because frankly, putting on a mask is not very difficult, at least not physically. It's not a big thing to do. It's just a 1 second process. But what it demonstrates is such a level of control over you that the government officials, that your governor or whoever it is, whether you're in America and it's your governor, or whether you're in some other country and it's your whole entire national government, it shows that they have such a control over your life that they can make you do something that small for such a statistically small effect, even in the most favorable studies for masks. It's not in terms of a population study, mind you, because the sort of narrow studies you see with regard to controlled testing procedures with no lengthy sort of time frame, all done in a short time frame. Those aren't relevant, all right? We're talking population studies. Even the most favorable to mass population studies, they're still not very favorable. It's a small effect, if anything. if they can make you do that, if they can make you do something that small, what else can they make you do? What else can Dr. Fauci convince half the population to do? What else can Governor Cuomo mandate that everyone does? What else can they do? They can do anything if you let them do this. And I'm not saying necessarily that you're some sort of sheeple if you wear a mask. There are reasonable minds may differ on the question of whether masks do help or not. There is conflicting evidence to this fact. My problem comes in when we have all of these government officials and all of these government people and all of these things being mandated. That's what I have a problem with. And I hope that's evident in what I speak, in how I speak, and in what I speak about, and, about how I speak mostly about Fauci. I'm not speaking about all these sort of doctors who are promoting masks. I'm not talking about those people, because those people aren't relevant to me. They're not the government. I don't care. Though I may criticize them, it's not going to be my major concern, if that makes any sense. Because there is a large difference between normal, voluntary decision-making that you would see from those sorts of things and the sort of government fiat that you see from governors currently in the U.S. and other national governments in other places. But on to our next story. Democrats' thin House majority could get smaller, depending on Supreme Court case ruling in redistricting. So essentially, to give you the rundown on what this story is and what the case is. The case is about whether illegal immigrants should be counted towards the allotment of congressional districts in the census. Now, the census has been going on this year. For those of you who don't know, for those of you who are, say, out of the country or something, who don't live in the U.S. And in the U.S., the census controls the House districts. It happens every 10 years. We do it, and then we redistrict everything, and so and allot a certain amount of congressional districts to each state, which they're allowed to draw however they wish. And that's where gerrymandering gets its origin from. It's just a process of our democratic thing. I mean, I do think it's funny that people still complain about gerrymandering from 10 years ago today, because the whole thing is, the reason why we redraw districts every 10 years is because they become inaccurate, and they're no longer identifiable as the districts they were 10 years ago. So complaining about redistricting for this election is just silly. It's just silly. Complain about it next election, because that's when it's going to actually be a problem. All right, this election, it doesn't affect it really at all, because you can't you redistribute every 10 years, and it's been 10 years. But anyway, to get back into the main story and not be off in the weeds as much, in this case, the census has been delayed because of COVID, because they haven't been able to do it, but they have done a very comprehensive census. Like, it's something like 2% more than they normally would. It's like 99.8, as opposed to like 98-something% as a percentage of households. But what this case is particularly about is that they want to disallow illegal immigrants from being counted towards congressional districts. And now, this makes perfect sense. There's no argument against it. Because why would you have them be counted in terms of redistricting, in terms of allotting congressional districts, when illegal immigrants can't vote? They can't vote in congressional elections. It's literally worthless to them. Like, whether they're counted or not doesn't matter. It's not as though it's some sort of oppression thing, because they're not included in the voters at all. It doesn't matter. They're not being represented regardless. They're illegal immigrants. That's the nature of what this is. But you still see leftists complaining about this sort of decision, mostly because a lot of illegal immigrants do live in blue states, and disallowing them from being counted in the census would very much favor Republican states in terms of congressional districts, which it will anyway, by the way. I mean, regardless of whether this case goes through, Democrats are going to have less seats. New York, California, they've been bleeding population for years now. And that's not going to change. It's not going to change even if they do include illegal immigrants or not. It's just not. It will make a difference. To be clear, it will. It will make a difference. but it's not going to, drastically change the trend. The trend will still be towards Republican states having more districts. Like, Utah's probably going to have a few more districts, and Florida and a few other states will have more districts because they just have more population now. The population movement still happened, and you're still going to see this sort of movement away from a lot of blue states to more red states. And that's really worrying for congressional Democrats anyway, especially after this year, where, for those of you who don't know, everything that was claimed to be a toss-up state, or a toss-up election, in this House election for this year, in 2020, the Republicans won all of them, literally every single one of them. And by the way, there are still people who claim that polling was mostly correct. No, it wasn't. They were wrong on the majority of races. And they thought that Ohio was a toss-up state for the presidential election. They thought Ohio was a toss-up state. Trump won it by 8. They thought Florida was a toss-up state or a lean blue state. Trump won it by 4. I mean, the only places they were right actually was in the contested states. Strangely, the pollsters were wrong in literally every state except for the ones where that got Biden the win. That's strange. Weird. But for all of the congressional districts, all the congressional races, they were completely wrong. It was ridiculous. There was never, for instance, to take this, put something into perspective. Susan Collins, senator from Maine, a Republican senator. It was claimed that there was essentially no chance and that she was finished because there was never a poll where she was up, not one. She won it by a few points. She won it handily. Like, it wasn't even a particularly strong contest. Same goes with something like Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham also was predicted for at least to be a toss-up, but he won it by like 8 to 10 points. I don't remember exactly how much, but it was ridiculous. They're wrong by so much, but people still defend them. And I guarantee you in 4 years, you're going to see people like Ben Shapiro or all these sorts of people who habitually trust pollsters for no reason, no discernible reason. They'll come back and they'll be like, well, all the polls are saying the Republicans going to lose. They're going to be saying that either in 2 or 4 years because that's what they've been doing all this time. I mean, this isn't a new trend. 2016 was the same way. But you already see the sort of revisionist history going on within the pollsters and all of this sort of stuff. So yeah, don't be surprised when all these pollsters come back in 2 to 4 years. But on to our next story. House Republicans are calling for the censure of a New Jersey Democrat who filed a bar complaint against Trump lawyers. Now, I think this shows, particularly the guy who was complaining against the New Jersey Democrat, not the people complaining against him. Sorry, I was not exactly clear there. So essentially, what he did, he said that the Trump's lawyers should be debarred because they were contesting the results of the election, essentially, and they were hurting our election integrity by questioning the election integrity. Now, I have spoken about how, in the past, I've spoken about how people who are looking at the perception of things, people who are focused entirely on how things are perceived. And this is a common trend among a lot of American politics. You see this in the Supreme Court, you see it with the executive branch, you see it with the legislature, and you see it within elections. You'll see what you're seeing right now is a lot of people saying, well, if you question the integrity of the election, it's going to make people not trust the election. And yes, that's true. People, when they see that the election is being questioned, are not going to trust the election as much. But that's not a relevant question. What should be asked rather than how things are perceived? How are we looking at the election? That's the sort of questioning that we're getting now. You'll see all sorts of journalists, Democrats, complain about how Trump is questioning the election integrity and putting it into question and all these sorts of different things. They're all so concerned about the perception of what the election is that they aren't concerned at all about how the election actually is. Because what is the point of treating the election as though it was fine if it wasn't? What's the point of saying there was nothing wrong with the election. If there was things wrong with the election. Now, these people will defend themselves, and it's their cognitive dissonance is absolutely radiating off of them. Because if you actually try to question them and try to say, well, here's all of these things, here are all these voter regulators, which I'm not going to go into right now, but because this is just for analogy. When you say, look at all these things, they'll say, well, you shouldn't question the election integrity because it will make people distrustful of the government. Or they'll say something to that effect. Their cognitive dissonance is showing they won't have a proper rebuttal to the actual allegations. They might say, oh, there's no evidence to that effect, even if there is. But their core argument will always come down to, you're questioning the election integrity, and that's hurting our institutions. That the question itself is what is hurting the institutions. But that is untrue. Questioning things, questioning institutions does not hurt the institution, particularly if the institution doesn't have anything wrong with it. If it doesn't have anything wrong with it, after all, it will just wade through the allegation and it'd come out the other side looking pretty. It'll look better, in fact, afterwards. An investigation into this would be the most helpful thing to do. A thorough, open, transparent investigation would fix a lot of problems. It would. It really, really would. Even if Biden ended up winning at the end of it. But they're refusing that. They're saying there's no evidence, thus we shouldn't investigate. Because the investigation would put it into question. Yeah, but if it doesn't end up going that way, if it ends up being that nothing was problematic, nothing happened, well, it comes out smelling like a rose, doesn't it? Like, the election process comes out looking pretty fine. It looks out pretty clean, doesn't it? That's not what they're doing. Obviously. It's not, because they don't care about that. They care about the perception. All they care about is the perception. And it's not unique to the left or right, all right? You have lots of people on the right who would do the exact same thing, or are more interested about the perception of things than they actually are, or the way they are. And that is one of the biggest problems in American elections. But that's not all for our stories. We do have more. Coca-Cola, Nike push back on legislation that would crack down on forced labor in China. Now, this is one of the most ridiculous arguments I've ever seen. Essentially, okay, to start off with, what the actual legislation was, is they're saying, if you're using forced labor, you have to watch it. And you have to watch yourself. Because if you're using forced labor, we're going to, do these sorts of sanctions on you. We're going to fine you, whatever. I don't know what the particular remedy is in this case. But their argument is, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act would require companies sending goods to the United States to scrutinize those supply chains, or perhaps abandon Chinese supply chains altogether. That's their argument. Their argument is, well, we'd have to, try. Well, we'd have to, look and see if people's rights are being violated or not. We'd have to actually pay attention to what we're doing in China. Oh, my gosh. And, it's fitting that it's companies like Nike, Coca-Cola, and Apple, these sorts of woke companies that are all doing this. It's so fitting. It's so fitting that these companies that have been praised by all these wokesters for all of their diversity outreach and all sorts of things, that are the ones arguing against that. You're not seeing Black Rifle Coffee or anything like that up there. You're not seeing any of those companies. You're not seeing My Pillow argue against this act. That's not happening. No, you're seeing companies like Nike do it, because they're the ones who are benefiting the most from China's authoritarian slavery. They're the ones who are benefiting from China's communism. Of course they are, because of course they are. Because what does communism help except the big guy? All right, what does government intervention help except the big guy? The answer is nothing. It only helps the big guy. It could only possibly help the big guy, because what could a public institution help except for the biggest person in the room? I mean, it's all majoritarianism. That's all what it is. But man, that's all for that story. On to our next story, and our last story. And this is essentially a repeat of a story from January, with a lot of people saying the exact same thing that they were saying in January. The headline: Iran vows to avenge slain nuclear scientists, says it won't be lured into conflict. This happened in January. Yet we're still going to see a lot of people saying, oh, we're going to have these sorts of huge war with Iran. Oh, this is definitely going to happen. You know, all those things that we were saying in January. We were talking about World War III and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's totally going to happen. You know, what amazes me about foreign policy in particular is that it seems as though most of the foreign policy experts fail to have any sort of pattern recognition whatsoever. They fail to see any of the sort of utterly predictable responses to things. They fail to see anything. They fail to see that A leads to B, and this always happens. They fail to see it. We've already seen this rigmarole happen before. Yeah, Soleimani was arguably a more important person, arguably one they'd want to go to war over with more. But they didn't do jack with that guy. They sent a bunch of missiles to an empty base. All right, and they warned the people who were in charge of the base beforehand. They warned them to make sure that no one was there. All right, they did nothing. All right, and this sort of absolute disregard for the past with regard to foreign policy is evident throughout most people's foreign policy positions. You see this not just with the sort of neoliberal, sort of war hawkish types who are railing on this decision now, the sort of Democrats and all that sort of stuff. The Biden potential administration, asterisk administration. You also see that sort of stuff with anti-war pansies. You see, because you've got all these people who are like, well, we've got to withdraw from Afghanistan because that's worked so much every single time we've done it in the past. You know, it's not like we've gone to war with Afghanistan, 3 times in the past 40 years? Oh, it's not like that's happened. And all of those have been precipitated by us leaving. It's not like we've done this again before. It's not like this is a process which has happened before and will happen again. Because let me tell you, the best way for you to go back to war with Afghanistan, for America to go back to war with Afghanistan, and by the way, sorry for the mic thing, the best way to get that to happen would be to remove yourself from it entirely. It would be the best way. Because guess what? All of the people who were children when we went in and destroyed their government, all of the people who were children then are now adults, are now fighting adults. So if you want to go back to war with Afghanistan, precipitously remove yourself from it. And yeah, you'll get the rejoinders from those people on that side saying, well, when do we leave then? I don't know, maybe around the same time we leave Japan. We have 50,000 people in Japan. We have about 1/50th the amount of people in Afghanistan as we do in Japan. We have a whole huge operation in Japan. We still have people in Japan from World War II. And now I would argue that's unnecessary. But for Afghanistan, absolutely, we need people in Afghanistan to prevent these sorts of insurrections. We need to make it so that their government is stable. Because if we don't, well, we're going to be in a war with them again and within the next 20 years. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. We need to stay there for at least more than a generation, which means at least 40 years, by the way. We need to wait until all of the people who would potentially be insurrectionists and would potentially go to war with the U.S. again are already old or dead. That's what we need to wait for. Seriously, that's what we need to wait for. If we do it any earlier, it's going to end up biting our faces. Like we're going to end up biting ourselves in the back. That's what's going to happen. All right. I think that's my most controversial opinion I've yet expressed on this show. I mean, I'm not anti-war. Wow. That's a big thing for the internet. And I think that's where I'm going to leave you off today, because that was our last story. I'm Cal Kidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.